It's such a pleasure to have you here with us, really.
Thank you, Alison. It's great to be here, too. What a beautiful, beautiful room.
Yeah, great stage for a beautiful woman.
Thank you. Likewise.
One of the pleasures of both memoirs are fantastic, very pleasurable to read. One of the pleasures of the second one, Watch Me, is that it's an opportunity to rediscover and review your career as an actress. And so, I could spend hours talking with you just about your various roles, but I wanted to take you back because you've said that you wanted to be an actress from an early age, when you were growing up in Galway, Ireland. And I wonder what it was that obviously you're the daughter of a famous director. It might not be surprising that that was your choice, but it was a big struggle for you. So what sparked the initial bug?
I think it was my best friend, Joan Buck, who came to visit me at St. Clarence when I was about 9 years old. And she was 3 years older and put together a performance from the Scottish play with another little girl. And Joan had sort of very elaborate ideas about how we should dress for the parts of the three witches and so forth. Peter O'Toole was staying at the house at the time, and because Joan's father was Peter O'Toole's manager and agent. And halfway during the performance, I think I came to the line, "Toad that under cold stone," and my eye caught Peter O'Toole's blue eyes, and I completely fell apart and fled from the scene. But it was my first real experience with the stage and the power of the stage. And I'd wanted to be an actress before this, but then after that, I really started to, assess the situation. And I'd go to my father's sets, and I'd see these beautiful creatures like Susan Kohner in Freud, when he was making Freud in Vienna. And I remember her very clearly in a sort of leopard skin coat and a leopard skin pillbox hat, and thinking, she was a queen. So I think it was partially that, those various influences that sort of brought me to desire to be an actress.
You remind me, right, the Scottish play, that was really your first terrible start, because, another famous start for you was when you starred in the film with your father, A Walk with Love and Death, in 1969. And that was a horrible experience.
It was a horrible disaster. I was 15. Of course, I badgered him. I wanted to be an actress, and at one point, my brother and I were almost candidates to play the Innocents in Jack Clayton's film, The Innocents, but Mom and Dad didn't think it was really appropriate. However, he decided that he was going to give me a film. And so at the age of 16, actually I was 15 when he conceived this idea, it was a movie and a 3-picture deal that he had at Fox called A Walk with Love and Death. Meanwhile, I was going to school in London, and there was a school search out for Juliet, for Romeo and Juliet, with Franco Zeffirelli directing. So I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be Juliet.
You'd already established that connection
Yes.
with Shakespeare.
And especially when I was called back to meet Franco Zeffirelli a second time. But then Dad, who had this plan in store for me, wrote a letter to Franco Zeffirelli telling him that I wasn't going to be Juliet. I was going to be working with him. I was so disappointed. And it wasn't just because I was rebellious and 16 and working with my father. It was also because I've always had a real feeling about what I was right for. And I knew I wasn't right for that part. I was always rebellious in some way, and this part seemed to me very passive and plain, and I couldn't wear all the makeup that I liked to wear at the time. And it was being controlled by him. So it was a bad situation.
You actually went on David Frost and apologized for how bad you were in that film.
I know. Well, my then boyfriend, who was very controlling, actually told me to do that.
Do you regret that?
No. I mean, I think I was just trying to please everybody at that point. I don't really regret it. No, it's like too late for that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just fascinating to me because in many ways, acting was a career you really had to fight for. I mean, you said your father gave you that role, but your next big role wasn't until 1985 in Prizzi's honor.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Which is Melrose Prizzi. Yeah.
The critic John Simon had likened me to an exhausted GNU. So I wasn't exactly filled with courage, and ambition after that review. I more wanted to hide, and modeling provided a very good respite because actually it was a very good training ground. I learned about lighting, I learned about moving, I learned a lot.
You love modeling. I mean, I
loved modeling.
Yeah.
And I loved, at the time it was not really done yet, but I was one of the first photographic girls who did runway. And I worked for Halston and Giorgio San Angelo and Sandra Rhodes and wonderful Japanese designers, and then I worked for Giorgio Armani, and I had a great time. We traveled. The girls all got along. We all knew each other. It was a fun time, great time.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about in order to become an actress, you kind of had to find the courage to declare yourself, to be who you were, that, which is maybe in part that rebellious spirit you had. Did modeling have that in it? Was it something?
Well, certainly it did for me after I got over a few humps. And the initial hump was going in to see Eileen Ford and her looking me up and down and saying, legs are good, how about a nose job? And I knew my dad would kill me if I had a nose job, so that wasn't to be. However, I went to Europe shortly after that and worked for a couple of years in Europe. And I became very popular in Europe, in Italy especially, and in Paris and London. And I did a lot of photographs with David Bailey, and I worked with Helmut Newton and Guy Bourdin in Paris. So I worked with the best. And I realized also that served me later on, because as an actress, who do you want to work with?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's interesting that you invoke your looks, because that's a recurrent theme through at least the first volume. Someone overhears a conversation that your parents are worried that you're not going to be a great beauty, and then you tell other stories later. Elia Kazan, in thinking about casting you, takes you out on the street and asks a passing woman, is she beautiful? And the woman basically says, no, interesting, but not beautiful. I mean, how much pressure did you feel? You wrote
huge. I mean, I was both convinced that I was not beautiful, and also, let's face it, the nose started growing first. 13 years old, and I had a complex about that, and I had, I know it's boring to hear girls talk about their complex about being too thin, but I was naturally very, very skinny, and I was teased in school for that because I was one of the tallest girls in class, if not the tallest. So, yes, I both teetered on the edge of knowing that I was not beautiful, but knowing that I somehow could be. I could kick it into that shape, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I did.
You say like you transformed yourself by a force of will.
Yeah.
What did that entail? So was it about the kind of acting and
Well,
inhabiting this space, or?
It was that, and also it was the belief of certain people that I was beautiful. I think mostly my mother, who told me I was beautiful all the time, even though I probably wasn't a lot of the time. Dick Avedon, who was the first person to ever photograph me, who liked noses. You know, the Europeans who liked noses. Americans didn't like noses at that time. They've gotten more popular over the last 20 years. It's true.
Maybe you had something to do with that.
I know.
You talked about Bob Richardson, who was your boyfriend when you were a model, famous fashion photographer, someone you worked with, and it's one of the first, most complicated relationships you have. He was someone who you talk about as having a huge influence on you, someone who allowed you, he was part of your coming of age, but he was violent and brutal and unstable.
Yeah, I met Bob when I first came to New York, and I came right after my mother's death in a car crash in 1969. I was understudying Marianne Faithfull at the Roundhouse in London. She was playing Ophelia in Tony Richardson's production. And she didn't come to America. Francesca Annis took over the part. But I didn't want to stay in London anymore. It was too sad for me. And my father, I thought my father would put me in a nunnery around that time. We weren't getting along very well. So the idea of coming to America was foremost in my mind. And when I arrived in New York, Harper's Bazaar, well, first I worked with Dick Avedon, and then Harper's Bazaar asked if I would be photographed for their magazine, and I agreed. And they sent the photographer to the theater to pick me up, the Lunt Fontaine Theater. And this extremely tall, rather haunted-looking man, he was 42 at the time. I was 17, 18 maybe, showed up in this tiny little red Fiat with an enormous kind of blonde poodle in the back. He was wearing a black hat. He was very interesting looking. We went out to Jones Beach, and he took my photograph for the magazine, and I really liked working for him. It was immediately a very, very strong encounter. And after that, we became lovers and moved in together, and I was with him for 4 years. I didn't know he was schizophrenic. And it's not just bipolar, but I didn't know that he was really mad, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting because you encountered him through trying to escape your father, but it was your father that in a way then offered you the escape hatch from Bob, right?
Yeah, I had a few, some great experiences with Bob, in that we continued to work together really, really well. We went to Europe together. We worked with Serge Lutens, who was a sort of genius behind Dior and then Shiseido makeup. He was a wonderful artist. And but we also shared very difficult times in which, you know, Bob would wake up and suddenly think I was the enemy. And that was really difficult because at the same time, you know, sometimes we had money because I would work, but for a photographer it took longer for the checks to come through, so there were times where we had no money at all. There's always been a part of me, though, that kind of likes a little bit to dabble in the other side, to see what it's like not to have any money.
Yeah.
See what it's like to sleep in a flea bag hotel. I don't know what it is exactly. I think maybe it's because I'm an actor and I need to know about that stuff, and I have a kind of attraction to the knowledge, not to the place. I mean, the places can be terrible and the people can be really edgy, but I don't know. I don't know why I'm attracted to that stuff in a way.
So that was
the
part
underworld
of the experience with Bob, living hand to mouth in a way.
Anyway, ultimately, we went to Mexico on a holiday, and things got really bad, and we split at the airport in Los Angeles, and I went to stay with my father and my stepmother.
So I want to come back to Prizzi's Honor, because that was a film you did with your father, and then with your boyfriend, Jack Nicholson, who we'll talk about in a bit. But I just wonder, having had that experience with your father in 1969, did you ever think, maybe I'm not going to go back and work with him? Maybe I'll, go it alone.
Well, I tried that for a while. The thing is, my position was difficult because I was the daughter of a very famous director and had become the girlfriend of a very famous actor, but I didn't want anything to come from either of them. Somehow I wanted to earn my own way, and I think it's probably because I was confronted with the kind of negativity that I had to deal with first time out of the gate. So I was determined that whatever it was going to be on my terms. Even if it was walking down, a runway on Laverne and Shirley with an Eiffel Tower on my head, at least that was something that Penny had said, well, would you like to come on my show, and threw me a little part. But that stuff made me feel good. It made me feel like I was in control in some way.
Or being the designer who brought the 18-inch version of Stonehenge on This Is Spinal Tap, right?
That's right, yeah, exactly.
A funny cameo.
So there are little ways of, and I got myself an agent, and would go on these little go-sees, and I remember reading for Sybil.
Wow. So May Rose Prizzi, you win an Academy Award, Best Supporting Actress for that. It's a hit. She seems like such a template in a way for a lot of the characters that you've played. I mean, if you think of like tough, but this real kind of vulnerable side, survivors.
Yeah, I those are the parts that I love. I love the layered ones. I like playing, mean women with soft interiors. So I think why I'm attracted to witches, or.
Well, I was going to say, even the Great Witch and the witches.
I like playing witches because witches are in hell. That's why they're witches. Their feet hurt, they have a headache, they have a backache, they have arthritis. There are reasons why a witch is a witch. She's furious. So, the interesting thing is to find the sympathy for the witch, not just the fact that the witch is scary, but poor witch,
You look like you were having a lot of fun, though, with that being scary.
So much fun.
Pushing children down
I know, so much fun.
hills, turning them into mice.
I know, and the perfect compatriot for that is Nick Rogue, you know, because I'd have an idea and go to Nick, and he'd be like, Yeah, he was such a great friend on that movie.
So the guy you're trying to seduce in Pritzi's honor is Jack Nicholson, and you had already seduced one another in real life. You met when you moved to LA in 1973, and this book has gotten a lot of attention, this volume, because of your relationship. Here it is, Jack Nicholson. But it's fascinating because the thing that's grabbing the headlines is the fact that you're the woman who beat the stuffing out of Jack Nicholson.
Well, he sort of deserved it at the time. The thing about Jack that's sort of strange, I mean, not that Jack isn't just popular with women, is that men feel so passionately about Jack. I was doing a Windy City interview earlier today, and I could tell the interviewer, it was just, that was all he was interested in immediately out of the gate, Jack. And, you know, it's fine, I understand it, but I have to remark on men's obsession with Jack. It almost, you know, goes further than women's, I would say, probably. And I answered the guy today and said, I think it's because Jack symbolizes what men would like to be if they were free. Mm-hmm. If they were unencumbered by women and, you know, fidelity and all that stuff. They could just be Jack, and everything would be great. Don't you think that's sort of how men think about Jack? Do you all think about Jack that way?
I am just sort of caught up and impressed by the fact that you beat him up. I mean, you could really go to town. I mean, this guy that, yeah, he represents the tough guy. I mean,
well,
you took him down.
I had to, you know. He'd just gone too far. And you know, and I was very angry, and
so you met and fell in love and embarked on a 17-year-long relationship.
Yeah, but it was, you know, a relationship that was certainly marked by several infidelities and that kind of thing. Although, you know, I do say in the book that for someone who's supposed to have been as infidel as he was, that you know, it wasn't, I never caught him with anyone. There was never anything that was really humiliating. But if I snooped, I'd generally find what I was looking for. So you stop snooping, mm-hmm. but you also kind of lose faith. So that had started to happen. And then Jack got another girl pregnant, you know, and that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back.
I mean, you two, I think the fascination with Jack and with Jack and you is that, you know, we talk about Brangelina or Kimye now, but you were like this iconic couple of the new Hollywood, right? And these ideas of kind of liberation and creativity and coming into this somewhat staid, fascinating industry and really breaking it apart. I mean, what was it like to live with him in that time, to be at the center of that?
God, we didn't think about it, you know? I remember going to a movie with Jack, and it was a Woody Allen movie, and there was a line in the movie from Paul Simon about let's go over to Jack and Anjelica's, and you know.
You were name dropped in a movie, yeah.
Yeah. So you think, but I don't think either of us were really aware that we were walking around being an iconic couple. It didn't really occur to us. You know, we were more about, what are we going to have for lunch?
Well, I mean, you talk
And we went to great places, and we had famous friends and stuff, but it's not like famous people necessarily walk around thinking I'm famous. You know?
Not thinking you're famous, but you're kind of in a moment of an age where there is this kind of high level of experimentation. It's in the arts, but it's also, you know, you talk about, frankly, about smoking pot, no big deal, but you say at one point you were also under the influence of a lively assortment of drugs, you know, and then these kind of arrangements where you're with someone, but you're with other people, and so it seems like, you know, there's this positive element to it all.
It was called the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it just about that age, or was it something, you know, or about your age, or was it something
all
about
of
the
that,
connection?
You know, the combination, the combinations, particularly Aspen at that time, which is where we spent a lot of time, was a very heady place to be, because there were healthy doses of hedonism on one side and health on the other. So, you know, we'd spend most of our nights partying, as they like to say, but also, you know, having a good time on the slopes, and it was a very fun time.
So infidelity in that relationship was something that ultimately broke the relationship, or made you decide that you couldn't be in it?
I think it breaks, I mean, I don't know. The French know about this. But for me, it changed something. It just does. It's the elephant in the room. If you talk about it, it's the elephant in the room. If you don't talk about it, it's the elephant in the room.
Yeah, yeah. How much was it about the experiences you'd gone through with your parents, where there was infidelity and...
I'm sure, you know, that's all part of it. I mean, my mother and father, I never saw my mother and my father in a bedroom together. And they were very, when we were growing up, they were very sort of distanced, and she would call him your father, and he would call her your mother.
He lived in the big house.
Called everyone darling, but her, you know. That stuff is confusing for a child, yeah.
Yeah. So it must have had a big impact on sort of your expectations of relationships and how to navigate them.
Probably, and probably I'm attracted to boys like Dad, you know, how it goes. I think that's sort of one of the great things that you get from writing a book is, you know, therapy. And you get to look at this stuff, and as it happens, you know, usually you have to pay like $250, what is it now, $350 an hour to have some psychiatrist sit there and listen to you. I've had Nan Graham, the best editor, now the best publisher at Scribner in the world, and Bill Whitworth. And I've gotten them as my psychiatrists, and the book is my therapy, and I'm happy as a clam in clover. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm curious about why you decided to be this candid and write a memoir. You talk about your sister Allegra, and you were inspired by the memoir she wrote, which was sort of her journey through infidelity and other things like that, understanding who her family was. How did that, what did that strike in you?
I don't know that it was just Allegra's book, although it's a beautiful book. For any one of you who haven't read it, it's called Love Child. And it's about her experiences she grew up my mother's daughter, but not my father's daughter. Her father was an English lord. She never really knew whose daughter she was till she was about 11 years old. But I think it comes a time in your life where you need to set the record straight on a few issues. And there are a few issues you're prepared to talk about. I don't know, I spent a lot of my more youthful years being introverted and more careful about what people knew about me. And then, I don't know, I think maybe this is the age of exposure. I see more people doing it these days. Maybe it has something to do with the internet and the fact that we're all so connected these days, and privacy isn't what it was, so it might as well be understood how we feel, what's going on inside us. And it's certainly, prevalent on the outside. You can see it in the way people dress now, and the fact that I don't know, they love their animals more. I think people want to share the way they feel more these days,
Yeah.
me included.
But it is, because if people go for details about your relationships, it's much more about who you are as a person and sort of the insecurities that you faced as you became an actress or decided to be a director.
It's a personal journey. And here's another thing. If, there are a lot of young girls out there, some of them really too thin. And I think who do entertain a bit of self-loathing and insecurities about who they are and how they look and all of that. And I'd like to help them along too. Help them feel like just because they're a bit different or because, they don't feel beautiful or up to par, that, that's something that they're creating. It's not necessarily so.
You also talk about your struggles to have a child, something that you were trying to do at various points in your life or came up as a conversation right up into your relationship with your late husband, Robert Graham. I wondered why you wanted to be so frank about that and how that shaped you in terms of, sort of
Well,
maternal
again,
feelings.
there are things that you try, that you succeed at. People are often under the impression that because, you're an actor, you're in the public eye, that you live an exalted life and nothing goes wrong. I think that's another sort of big shock about living at this time. There was a time when women wouldn't talk about having breast cancer, would hide what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost shameful. And I think it's important to connect over these things.
I want to talk a little bit about the first film that you directed, Bastard Out of Carolina, which is a beloved book, Dorothy Allison. It was a project that you'd put it out there that you wanted to direct, but it kind of fell into your lap because they needed someone. What drew you to the story? What made you decide, this is it, this is what I'm going to do? Because it's like a wrenching tale of sexual abuse, of a child abused by her father, the person that, you're supposed to be able to trust.
Well, I was very moved by the book, obviously. Beautiful book by Dorothy Allison. And I think it was the plight of the child.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that all of this man's sickness is visited on this innocent. And to the point of where even her mother abandons her. Her mother lets this happen. It was, I thought, a really important and really shocking and really incredibly courageous story for Dorothy to have told. It's very autobiographical, even though it's a novel. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I was very inspired to do it from the moment I first read it. And I read it, I had to give them an answer over a weekend, actually. They sent it to me on Friday. On Monday, I said, I'm in.
It's a great film. I mean, it screened in Cannes, and
well, yeah, it had a bit of history because I made it for Ted Turner's company, and we were in North Carolina, and I was sending dailies back every day. I found this fantastic child called Jenna Malone, who's in the Hunger Games. I'm very proud of her. Anyway, it was, being very well received by the company, and they were complimenting us on the dailies, and everything seemed fine till I got back to Los Angeles, and I was called into the Turner offices and met an executive there called Scott Sassa, and he said, you're going to have to take out 2 scenes. And I said, okay, what might they be? And he said, well, the molestation and the rape scene. And I said, but that's what the movie's about. So he said, well, I'm afraid we can't show that on this network. I said, well, has Ted Turner seen the movie? And he said, no. Like, why would he? I said, well, maybe you should show it to him. And he went, is that what you want? And I said, yes, please. I would very much appreciate it if you'd show it to him. And Ted Turner was at the time with Jane Fonda, so I was really secure. And so a couple of days went by, and Scott Sassa called me back into his office, and I said, well, how did it go? And he said, they screamed. He didn't want the movie anywhere near his network. So after that, I got very depressed, and for about a day, I remember we were supposed to be giving a party, Bob and I was so depressed that I stayed upstairs all night long and kind of peered over the balcony at everyone having a party. I was miserable. And then the next day, I got a call from the Cannes Film Festival from Gilles Jacob, who said he'd like to show my movie in Un Certain Regard, which is an out of competition, but a nice honor. So then I was all happy and went off to Cannes.
Ted Turner is no friend to the Huston family. He wanted to colorize asphalt charcoal.
I know. But here's the thing. My dad was sort of outraged and angry about it, and then he saw a documentary about Ted Turner and decided that he loved Ted Turner. He's quite a guy, And I was like, Dad, you hate him. No, he's quite a guy. Very interesting.
Well, I know there are a lot of people here who love you, who would love to talk with you. So why don't we move to the Q&A? And we have people wandering around on microphones. So put your hand up if you want to ask a question. And do please ask a question, if you would.
Hello, Ms. Huston.
Hi.
I'm one of a few men who is far more fascinated with you than I am with Jack Nicholson. And the reason is, when I was 14 years old, my father took me to see the Grifters, and I have loved this film ever since. And Stephen Frears is also one of my favorite directors. So I wanted to ask you what it was like to work with him and how you feel about the movie now, please.
Thank you, and thank you. I loved making the Grifters. From the moment I walked into our first reading, and I'd never met John Cusack, and I'd heard about Annette Bening because she'd been in Liaison Dangereuse. I was blown away by both of them. I thought, oh my God. And I was going through all this stuff with Jack at the time, so I was distracted. And that reading focused me like I've never been focused. I thought, ooh, I'm going to have to catch up with these two. They were on fire. And the reason was because this script was so great. It was dark and tortured and so well written. Donald Westlake did a really fantastic adaptation. Frears is just a wonderful director. He cuts in the camera so that, you know, you're not always bound to do these kind of conventional takes where he does a master and then he goes in for close-up and then he goes back there for close-up. Stephen cuts the way he wants to see the film. And I think it's because he had that training at the BBC that he's just so fluid. He's also kind of subversive, so he's, you know, he has a great eye for certain things, you know. Like, just to give you an example, there's a scene in the movie where my son's supposed to be coming to see me. I'm in a motel, I'm on the run. And so just in case something goes wrong, I put a gun together, put a silencer on a gun, and then I wait for him to come. And he said, how would you like your bedroom to look? And I said, I hadn't really thought of that, but he said, it should look like, you know, a date that you've been dressing for a date. So all these clothes that she'd been trying on, you know, are all kind of discarded on the floor. He gives a great background to the visual. And he's really fun to work with. I like him a lot. He's still a very close friend of mine.
Good evening, Ms.
Hi.
Huston. I think you're great.
Thank you.
I think the finest film adaptation of a literary work that I have ever seen is The Dead. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Again, thank you. The Dead came about for me when my dad was at the Jewelstein Eye Clinic having a cataract operation and couldn't see. And I went up to his room and there was a script on the bedside table. And he said, do you see that script on the table, honey? And I said, yes, Dad. And he said, would you read it to me? And the first page read the screenplay by Tony Huston, my brother. So I was intrigued because I didn't know Tony had written a script for Dad. And I read through the script to him. And it was beautiful. And he said, what about it, honey? Shall we do it? And I said, yes, of course. And then I went off and made a couple of movies and came back to Los Angeles. And he was already casting for The Dead. And he wasn't well enough to travel. So his producer, who is a German producer called Wieland Schulz-Keil, independent, had recorded all of these actors from the Abbey Theater, put them on tape so Dad could see them. And among them was Donald McCann and also Kate O'Toole, Peter's daughter. But eventually, we had Donald come over, and he and I did a screen test together. And then the rest of the cast assembled in a warehouse, actually, in Valencia, which is the home of Magic Mountain in Los Angeles, and was then just this kind of wasteland of warehouses. I think they make some TV there now, but in the day it was just sort of odd and derelict. And Dad assembled his crew, which consisted of Dorothy Jenkins, who'd done, costumes for the Misfits many, many years before. She'd actually worked for Cecil B. DeMille. Stephen Grimes, his set designer, Tommy Shaw, his first AD, his old, trusted, tried and true crew. So Tony and I felt like, we were so happy to be in there. And we rehearsed and shot in continuity for the whole film. So it was kind of nerve-wracking for me because I knew this big scene was coming up at the end. And for those of you who don't know the story, it's an epiphany set on the date of the Epiphany in Dublin, Ireland, at the home of the Morkan sisters, the two women who are very active in the Dublin musical world. And they have guests who come, and this is a sort of Christmas feast that they have. And they talk, the people who come are singers and artists, and they recite poetry, and they interact, and they dance. And at the end of the evening, Gabriel, who is Donald McCann's part, sees his wife in a kind of rapture as she listens to an Irish tenor. And they get back to their hotel room in the Gresham Hotel in Dublin, and he questions her, and he finds out something about her that he's never known, that completely changes his world and the way they understand each other. So it's a very deep, it sort of goes from nothing to everything, Anyway, it's a beautiful film. I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of Dad for getting through it, because he was in a wheelchair on an oxygen tank when he was shooting it. And it was really hard, but dear, oh dear, I'm falling apart.
But it was an amazing experience. And as you said, sort of recreating this world that you'd grown up in with him on this set. It's just a beautiful experience. We have another question right here.
It's a pleasure to be in the room with you in this beautiful
Thank you.
venue, because I think that you are absolutely the embodiment of brains and exotic beauty and spunk. And I think that through all...
Thank you so much.
So, it's a delight. And I was a huge fan of Smash, and I couldn't understand that the American public didn't just want years of it. And I'd love to hear you talk about that, but my real question is about the journey that you took doing the memoir. I've read the first one. I can't wait to read the second one. And I write memoir myself. And I understand it does have to do with these layers of vision and back in your life. So I'd love to hear you talk about that process.
Well, that's a lot of questions, but
did.
thank you. Smash, Smash, I think actually the American public was not the problem with Smash. I think, I don't know, I think it was a difficult thing happened after the first year, in that they let Teresa Rebeck, who was our writer and showrunner, go. And I don't think they were ever able to replace her or her original vision, which was very a pity. And I think maybe, I don't know what the intention of the network was. Maybe it was to lock in a younger demographic, but and also it seemed to me that the timing was difficult, because I don't know. I know how I am. 10 o'clock at night is late for me to watch a TV show. I'm starting to get tired. I've had my dinner, hopefully. I would have thought that 9 o'clock was probably a better time for it, but I'm not an expert on that at all. I just think they didn't want it to continue as much as as good as it was. And then memoirs. I think it's really lovely to have this to occupy me. It's been really good, particularly when I was making Smash, because it took maybe 4 years for me to write both of these books. And originally, it was Smash that sort of allowed me to keep a good schedule, because I'd work 3 days, 4 days very intensively on the show, and I was able to have the book also to continue to work on intensively while I was doing it. Otherwise, I would have been, I think, quite unbalanced by the experience of working on a series for television. It's very intense and very kind of, there's no end in sight when you're working on a series.
Ms. Huston, what a privilege to be in your presence.
Thank you.
After decades of making up who you were on film, I got to read your first book and discover the graciousness that you are and the resiliency, and then to hear you talk about your dad. If you could just address, where do you source that gracious resilience and the perseverance to carry through?
Well, that's lovely of you to say. My mom and dad, they brought me up right, and my nurse, who threatened to spank me with the back of her hand if I didn't straighten up. But I think yes, them certainly, and also growing up in Ireland, growing up in, with the privilege of the country and with country values, with poetry and singing and all of the things that kind of bring people together in the country before television happened when I was 12. I think those are the things that you really hold with you, those early experiences. And I'm very grateful to my parents for exposing me to the arts. My mother, even more than my father. I mean, I got to go on my father's sets and all of that, but my mother took me to plays, she took me to the ballet, she took me to, I saw Nureyev and Margot Fontaine, I saw Maria Callas, I saw Mabel Mercer, I saw Marlene Dietrich, I saw Ike and Tina Turner. But my mother exposed me to all of this stuff, and she knew how to play, and I think that's the main influence of my life. Thank you.